Thank you so much for joining us here today, Yumna. I'm so excited being a foodie myself, one who doesn't cook super well, but admiring you. Thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here and to share a little bit about my journey and, everything that I've been doing over the last 10 years and just the healthy eating and lifestyle that, I've come to.
Yeah. And there's so much. I mean, the fact that the big thing we want to focus on, of course, is the amazing cookbook you have that has come out. And it's been this accumulation of 10 years, like you said, of really going through different recipes and blending. But to start with kind of your foodie journey, for those that maybe don't know as much about you or they haven't heard, where did it start for you? Because you weren't one of those people who like came out, started cooking at 5 years old.
No, absolutely not. And, food is such a big part of our culture. I'm Lebanese and, the way we show love is through food. And so I grew up watching my mom labor over just these, elaborate meals for my, siblings and for our family and cousins and friends. And it was just something that she did all the time. And, she would constantly ask me to like, hey, come learn to cook. And I'm like, no, I don't want to. I don't like cooking, because to me it just looks like labor intensive. It's what I
Yeah.
picked up from it. And so I was the person in charge of always setting the table, arranging the strawberries on a fruit platter, making sure like the hummus had the perfect swipes in there. And so I enjoyed that piece of it. But then what happened was as I got married and I started having little kids. And so when we moved away, I realized that I was craving that like comfort food that my mom always cooked. And so I picked up the phone. There was no FaceTime at this time. And I just said, Mom, how do you make this dish? And how do you make this dish? And so that's where really started my journey at that time. And I took a little bit of what my mom taught me, and then I also started to just delve into it on my own.
I That's the aspect that I think is so interesting is that you're fusing this cultural influence of what you grew up with, that Mediterranean style cooking, Lebanese cooking, but then also you have the American classics and
Yes.
comfort from growing up there. Is there one dish well, I have 2 questions about your recipes actually. So first is there one dish that you made after speaking with your mom all this time, having these calls, starting to learn these ingredients where you thought I've got it. Like, I'm so proud of this dish. Do you remember what this one was?
As basic as it was rice because it's so hard to cook good rice. And my mom would just make it so fluffy and gorgeous. And I struggled with that. And I think I had 3 to 4 pots of mushy rice and undercooked rice. And the problem was my mom didn't measure anything. And I'm like, well, what's the measurement? And so I just kept playing around with it. And she would give me visual cues and things to look for. And then I nailed it. And as soon as I nailed it, I wrote it down. And I was like, this is what I did today.
I love that you said rice actually because everything you're saying is it sounds so simple, but there's so much technique that goes into it. And it is true when you're learning from parents and grandparents, there is no 1 cup of this. It's like a little
Right.
handful of this. And then
Exactly. And you're just, like, guessing.
what has she said about your cooking over the years?
She's actually really impressed. I'm an artist, and so she's always seen this artistic side of cooking that I enjoyed. So one of the things that I used to help her with a lot was wrapping grape leaves, and it's such a meticulous job. It's wrapped with a little bit of rice and sometimes either ground beef or vegetables. She goes, "Now you're not just, a perfectionist and, like, creative, but you also are just making it look so approachable." And it is approachable. I'm able to take these dishes that, in her mind were more complicated to make. And she goes, oh my gosh, you're simplifying it so much by telling people that they can freeze a bunch of garlic at once. They can freeze cilantro. They don't have to make the tomato sauce from scratch and just all these little simple things. And she's just proud of how accessible I'm making these Mediterranean dishes.
Yeah, this is a huge thing for what you're doing because like, I'm sure people listening even think, "I would love to make these recipes. I would love to even cook." I know there's some of you listening that don't cook.
Right.
But what you do is great because I know with a new cookbook in particular, it's like 30 minutes or less. What is it, 10 ingredients or less as well?
Yes. Yes.
And that's so accessible. I mean, everyone can do that. It's not out there. And I think what's interesting too is and you can comment more on this maybe. I'm curious for your opinion, but it feels like food blogging is becoming much more relatable now where before it was I don't know, like make a diamond out of a bread or something.
Correct.
I'm curious to see what is the I know that you follow the trends and that you're very much trying to also add your own spin to it. Can you talk about what's your recipe process? Like, how do you honor these cultural influences, this background, but then also give a little bit more of what people know?
Absolutely. That's a really good question. And so, one of the things that I love to do is just think about, is the meal shareable? Is there something in there that's like interesting or unique that gives a little bit spin, whether it's a different ingredient, like I said, or a hack? For example, as I made a date bread and I thought, oh, that could be kind of, nothing too exciting. But there's a hack in the video, in the beginning of the video, of actually spraying my knife with avocado oil that makes it just a little bit easier to cut it. And it's a great hack and it gets your attention because you hear the sound of that avocado spray in the beginning. You're wondering, why am I spraying my knife with avocado oil? And then I just proceed with a really easy recipe that has 10 ingredients or less, can literally be made by mixing things 15, 20 minutes and throwing in the oven. And so I try to keep, while keeping something interesting that's going to grab their attention, I try to keep it so that it's ingredients that people have. It's also something that feels approachable, doesn't have any kind of unusual techniques or tools that they wouldn't have access to or couldn't buy for like 2, $3. Like I've got some fun ones like an herb stripper that's fun to just have. And it's a fast way to strip herbs and it's an unnecessary tool probably, but it's a few dollars, and so it works out really well. So when I think about things that I grew up eating, for example, like a stuffed squash recipe, that's so tedious to sit there and core squash. And so how do I make it more fun? Like a fun tool, for example, or making it deconstructed by just chopping up the squash and putting all the elements into it. So you get the flavors of the region, but in just a more approachable way that makes it super easy for people to make the recipe. So I try to do that as much as I can. And then when it comes to American recipes, I'll try to infuse them with a little bit of Mediterranean flavor. And this is so much of what my book is about. So if I am, for example, baking a bread, I might throw some tahini in there instead of butter, or in addition to butter, to add some fat, to add a little bit of a nutty flavor and just give it that moisture that, butter is going to give, but in a different way. And tahini is so accessible these days, much more than it was maybe 10 years ago. And I'll do this with a few other ingredients as well, like using lebne, which is a Middle Eastern
Yeah.
spreadable cheese, instead of yogurt. It has the consistency of like a Greek yogurt, but a little bit thicker. So these little fun swaps that just make it exciting. And so it's taking these everyday recipes and doing that. And so a lot of what I share on my website and on Instagram is just these, fusions of Middle Eastern and Midwestern food is how I look at it.
How do you come up with this though? Because that's brilliant. This idea of tahini instead of butter or an addition, or
Yeah.
the labna instead of yogurt or an addition. How does that even come to you? How do
Yeah.
you source those ideas?
It's like when somebody has like is bilingual, for example, it's just like their mind is thinking of these two things in like parallel at both points, and they're like speaking both languages. Like I sometimes think in Arabic, but also process things in English because Arabic was my first language. And so I think of it like that when it comes to cooking. Like my mind is constantly like lebne is always in my fridge, tahini is always in my pantry. And so seeing how they're normally used in Arabic cuisine and Lebanese recipes that I'm used to making and thinking about like, how do I make this just a little bit different? I'm making a tomato soup and instead of adding a dollop of sour cream, like, using it that way. And so, and another way too is just knowing about how to substitute. So lebne, like anything with Greek yogurt, fair game. Greek yogurt or sour cream, fair game to substitute lebne. Same with tahini, like almost anything like, with like peanut butter that's kind of runny or even butter, anything like super like fatty and like, rich can be substituted with that. And it's interesting to play on these things with sweet and savory because Lebanon and tahini, for example, can really go both ways. And I've done, a little bit of both with them, which is it's really fun to just see what you can do to stretch these ingredients. And
Yeah.
one of the other things too that I like to do is I am so resourceful when it comes to ingredients. Like my kids, like they know me. We hate wasting anything. So if I've got 2 tablespoons of lemon left over in a tub and not sure what to do with it, like I will find a use for it. And so I think that resourcefulness that I grew up in Africa, for example, in a third world country. And so it wasn't as easy to get ingredients and, have so many resources available to us. And so we had to be scrappy sometimes. And I've just always been that way with my mentality. And so I feel like that's kind of made me more creative too, because I've looked at ingredients like, what else can I do with this? It's here in my fridge. How else can I use it? And so it actually inspires me to create really fun meals.
Yeah, it gives you such a unique background advantage in doing it that you pull from 2 cultures, but then you also have this resourcefulness. I
Yes.
know my mother-in-law and father-in-law, they grew up in Africa, but left Uganda because of the war and came over, and so one of the things they make is tapla, and it's using leftover rice. So
Yes.
it's like the same thing of, like, how do
Yeah.
you create with what you already have, and that's so valuable for anyone listening because we all have, the fridge leftovers that we have to scavenge.
Absolutely, yeah. Oh, and what's really interesting is I am such a like queen of using leftovers that I actually have a chapter in my cookbook that's
Mhm.
all about how to use leftovers. And so I think it's my favorite chapter in the book because it's just genius and it's just like so simple and so applicable to every day. So for example, if you have leftover smoothie, so I have a smoothie, 3 smoothies in my cookbook. And so if you've got any of those leftover smoothies, every cup of it can be mixed with half a cup of oats, for example, and you've got overnight oats. Like you think you're going to drink more than you actually drink, or your kids don't end up finishing what they said they're going to finish. And so, super fun ways to use leftovers in lots of different ways like that.
That's great. That's something you don't even think about, but it's so simple to do that instead of throwing it away or dumping it, whatever, you can use it for something else. I was gonna
Oh, yeah.
ask you, can you share one tip? And that was a great one. What are some of the so you mentioned that in the book, a lot of it is adding your own turn and twist and take on different American foods or different classic foods. What are some of the, like, standout flavors for you that you grew up with that just really remind you of home that you wanted to bring to anyone who uses the book or bakes or cooks?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I first got this idea for this book, I really was thinking of like Mid East meets Midwest, and like growing up in Michigan and like being Lebanese from the Middle East. I just felt like Mid East meets Midwest and really wanted that to be like the whole even title of the book. And so I actually ended up concentrating on 8 ingredients. And so 3 of them are spices, za'atar, sumac, and seven spice. Then we've got rose water and pomegranate molasses, which are, liquids that you can use. They literally will last you a year in the pantry and can just really revolutionize so much flavor. For example, I'll take a drop of rose water and add it to strawberry pancakes, and it just all of a sudden the strawberry flavor is enhanced. It feels bright and springy, and it tastes so different. And you can skip it if you wanted to and just use vanilla extract. So we've got the 3 spices, we've got pomegranate molasses, we've got rose water. Then pomegranate molasses, for example, is very similar to a balsamic vinegar. So what I like to use it for example, is like with chicken or with a dressing, for example. And so in the places that I do use it in the book, for example, adding it on top of chicken, if you don't have it, just add a little drop of balsamic vinegar and you'll essentially kind of have the same thing. And then we've got tahini, which I kind of touched on a little bit earlier as well. Dates, which I just feel like, I mean, they're nature's candy, such a great way to sweeten things. And there's a lot of fun things that I do with it. One of which is a rice pilaf or a couscous pilaf actually that has chopped up dates instead of raisins. And then lebne, which it's used so many times in the book for all of my dips. Like everything that gets dipped, it's dipped in some kind of form of lebne. It's used to bind together like a vegetarian burger. It's also used to add a little creamy touch to soups. But a super fun way to just have a little bit more fun with recipes that you already make, like pancakes and, you know, roasted chicken.
Yeah, I love that you do this because it's a way to experiment, but it's also time saving and money saving because there's those recipes you do and they have you buy saffron and you use it once.
I was gonna say some of these too, you can actually make them. You can make pomegranate molasses. You can make rose water. I've never actually made it myself, but you can if you wanted to. You can make tahini, which I've also never made before. But the ones that you can make, I've actually included like how to make lebne, how to make seven spice, and how to make pomegranate molasses as well.
Oh, that's great. Because that's interesting, not just from a perspective of, "Oh, I don't wanna buy it," but also I'm curious to try to make it on my own from
Yes,
scratch. So that
absolutely.
makes sense. But how do you go, like, even though you've narrowed down, "Okay, these are the 8 flavors I'm gonna sprinkle throughout," how do you narrow down all how many do you know how many recipes are on your website? Do you have, like, how many, on the top of your
Yeah.
head?
So I have 1,250 recipes on my website, and the website is about 8 years old, and I've actually deleted a lot of old crappy ones. So tons of recipes on my website. And when I first started, I was kind of afraid of, sharing too much of the Middle Eastern recipes because I thought that it was too unfamiliar. And so I really was focusing on more things like, quinoa, avocado salad, and overnight oats, and, more approachable, like things like that, avocado toast. And over time, I've started to just add so many more Lebanese recipes and Mediterranean inspired flavors. And now we try to put a spin on almost anything that we do on the website to try to add that Mediterranean spin wherever it makes sense. So if I'm making a beef stew, there's going to be a little special like ingredient in there that just makes it a little bit more Mediterranean. So it's just kind of a little hint of it here and there. So when it came down to this book, we wanted it to be mostly new recipes. So 100 of them are new recipes, but 25 do come from the website. And so there's 25 that I just had to do things that like, my claim to fame is the baked feta pasta that everybody started following me because of. So that one has to be in the book. And then there's, a few others like my mom's fattoush salad, for example, or the way my dad makes hummus. Like it's just those things that I had to include in the book, especially because it's the first one. It might not be, it might be the only one. I'm not sure. And so it's just, I wanted to make sure that it was a true statement of who I am and the things that bring me joy.
How did you first because what's interesting I'm in shock that you did 100 other new ones on top of all the thousands, but how did you get what was the point where you realized that people were really open to these different flavors? Do you remember, was it like a gradual thing or you saw the analytics or what showed it
Yeah.
to you?
I think the first one that I ever did was it's called chicken fette. And all it is like warm yogurt with chickpeas, pine nuts, parsley, and then chicken on there. So it's kind of like, and I was like, this is so weird, but I'm going to do it anyways. And I'm just going to throw it out there. And then, it was hard to rank for things on Google like tabbouleh or hummus because they're so big. And so when I would post those things, I'm like, well, other people have them too, and they're not Middle Eastern. So those were like safe bets. So I would throw some of those things in there. But then I started to do more niche stuff. And it was interesting finding people. I figured, oh, whoever's Lebanese looking for this, there's not a lot of competition. Maybe they'll find me. And so what happened was those people found me. They were like, oh my gosh, it tastes like my mom's. But then other people who were like, wait, I have yogurt, chickpeas, pine nuts, and chicken and parsley. Like, I can totally make this recipe. And so it felt so accessible. And so, but the completely different way of like thinking about those ingredients together in a warm dish. Like, it's not very common to warm yogurt and have it, with chicken on top of it. So just thinking about those things made people like really excited to try something new that felt accessible. And so that's what I do a lot of times too now. Like a lot of these, and so that encouraged me. I'm like, okay, it's only like 500 people that are searching for this in a month, but those people, it served those people. And it also inspired others who are already on my website to try something new. And they felt like they had a culinary adventure, which was really cool. But I read I have 4.5 million followers on Instagram, but I read every single comment. Every day I spend a good hour reading and replying to comments. And some days when something goes viral, I can't keep up with it, but I'll still dedicate an hour to reading all of that. And then I also read all the comments on my website that come in too, so that I can see like what are people enjoying, what things are giving them trouble, what things are recipes that I need to go back and retest because they didn't work for seven of the last people for some reason. So I take a lot of pride in responding to my community and seeing what's resonating with them and just doubling down on what they're telling me works. So yeah, I think that's been really helpful just listening to my community.
Yeah. Well, that's the amazing part, isn't it? Is that you go from not sure if people are going to really resonate with it to then they're really enjoying it and you're getting feedback from them on those recipes to, make it more accessible and more doable. And it makes
Absolutely.
complete sense then, like why you have over 4 million. 'Cause you're doing all this work, like you're really engaging and you're bringing something that's new. I always say, like, I feel that your acceptance of different cultures really does start with food. That's where people begin their curiosity, and so it's important to be able to showcase that, and that's why I think your book is so interesting. It's not just a cookbook, like, it's introducing new flavors and new ways of doing things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that people have enough cookbooks and I think people have my website for free recipes, but I think that this cookbook kind of feels like a journey and kind of feels like, things that you can totally make on a daily basis, but still adds a little bit of excitement and gives you confidence in the kitchen. in just a fun new way, and just having it like in your hand. Even for me to have my cookbook in my hand and to be cooking recipes or seeing my daughter make like, tahini banana bread the other day was just like so cute. Just watching her like put it together. And she's like, your recipe's actually easy. And I just make this gorgeous loaf. And it's so exciting for any age. Honestly, that's exciting when you have a recipe success. And I want people to feel that confidence in the kitchen. So I'm hoping the book does that for people.
I think it will because too, your daughter she's not very old, right? Isn't she like 11, 12?
Yeah, she actually just turned 13, so
Oh,
super
she just turned
young. Yeah,
13 and
super
she's
young.
making this, so
She's
that's
making
pretty
the
incredible.
recipes, yeah. She actually made toffee from my website once, and I was gone on a business trip, came back 2 days later, and I'm like, "Where'd this toffee come from?" And she's like, "I made it from your website." And I'm like, "You made toffee?" Like, I was like, "But that's more of a technical recipe, like, you need the thermometer." And she's like, "Yeah, but I made it, it's easy." I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this is great because I thought it was easy, but I still thought it was kinda technical." And yeah, and so she's like, "The way you break it down is so simple and approachable." And I'm like, "I appreciate that, my 13-year-old."
I'm thinking, like, when I was her age is when I actually started cooking as well, and my
Yeah.
first cookbook was a Mediterranean cookbook,
Oh,
which
I
I
love
grew up in the Midwest, so if
yeah,
you can imagine, this was like I'm 38 now.
yeah,
Back then at her age, it was hard
yeah.
to get that cookbook,
Oh, I'm
and I
sure.
loved making that stuff, but you know how long those recipes are and how much time it took, and I remember losing excitement gradually because it was just so expensive and so timely, and I couldn't find the stuff, and then I just kind of stopped doing it. So,
Mhm.
it's like the fact that it's almost like a revolution, food
Yeah.
revolution.
Absolutely. And, having so many of these ingredients so easily accessible online too right now, it just makes cooking so much easier. And so it's my dream actually to also have a product line that one day has those 8 Mediterranean ingredients, And so it's something that I'm kind of trying to work on in the background. And it was one thing I wanted to have it done by the time the cookbook comes out, but it wasn't possible.
That's a brilliant idea. I especially love it for the spices because that might be
Yes.
something where it's just nice to get it in one place for
Yes.
doing it. The big question I wanna make sure I ask you before you go is obviously we'll ask where to find you, but before that is one of the things that I really enjoy about what you do is this emphasis on healthy-ish recipes, where they are, most of the time, very whole foods, but it's not super focused on it's this many calories or whatever. It's, like, very open to nourishing your soul and also, like, enjoying it. Can you talk a little bit about your philosophy with food from that standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So I grew up just being able to eat anything and everything. And I was just always so active that I never really cared as much about like, oh, am I gaining weight? And we just didn't live in that kind of society growing up. And so when I went away to college and I was just eating because it was dorm food and I felt sluggish. And so I remember starting a diet and I remember, eating something once and my brother was like, "What are you eating?" And I said, "Oh, it's only 2 points." And he's like, "What do you mean 2 points?" He said, "But what is it made out of?" I'm like, "Oh, but look at the ingredients. It's not bad, and it's only like 60 calories and etc." And so because I got, I fell into it, I fell into the whole diet culture. And it wasn't until kind of my brother was like, "But what are you putting in your body?" And I was like, what am I putting in my body? And I started to kind of question this. And this was really early on. It was like I was 25 years old. I didn't have kids yet or anything like that. So I started to, at the time I had gotten married, I moved away to a city and I was in Jacksonville, Florida, for example, in Arizona. And we would go to these markets all the time. And I would just talk to the farmers and be like, "Oh, what's rutabaga? And how do you use this?" And I just became so excited about like, "Oh, this is so cool. You can actually cut it up and use it instead of fries or instead of etc." And so I think what got me really excited about just kind of this flip that happened was like, how can we just eat whole foods and make them like just taste even better? And it became this like fun challenge for me. And what happened was after doing that, like I was able to just sustain my weight, feel more energetic. I felt so much better than I did before. And it wasn't even about the scale anymore. I didn't even care about the scale. I just cared that like, wow, I ate, so many vegetables today in that meal and I feel amazing. I feel like my skin looked better. I had more pep in my step and all of that. And so, after experiencing that and then starting my blog and then really going into like what is quinoa and how do we use it more and asking all those questions, I realized that I never felt like I was depriving myself of anything after that. And it was just more like, what do I feel like eating and how do I make it more colorful and more nutritious by just adding things to it? And so I just, I still eat meat, I eat all the things, but I'm very veggie forward. And I feel like when you can load up on colors and texture, I feel like you can't really go wrong with that. So in everything that I do, I try to think about how do I make it more colorful? How do I add, something fresh and bright and good for you to this meal?
I love that because that very much shows me, like, that's kind of the beginning of where you came up with Feel Good Foodie, right? I mean, how
Yes.
did you come up with that name? It's
Yeah.
that whole philosophy, isn't it?
Exactly, and actually my husband, because I had been down that journey for a couple years at that point, and my husband was like, "You are everything that you do, it's all about you always talk about, like, it makes me feel good. You're energetic because you had this meal and you're talking about, like, the food that makes you feel good." And so he's like, "You need to." And so my husband actually came up with the name and he said, "You're a feel good foodie. That should be your Instagram name." Like, "Okay, I love it. It's so true." Like everything you're right. Like it's the food that makes us feel good and ingredients that make us feel good without ever feeling deprived.
I love all the things about that. Food that makes you feel amazing, but food that also tastes incredible, food that's chewable. So last biggest question then is where can people listening find you?
So I'm Feel Good Foodie everywhere on social media and on my website. And my cookbook is available everywhere you can buy a cookbook. It's also available in ebook version if you prefer that.
So we'll include links for connecting with you and for getting your cookbook. And I think it would be amazing anyone listening to at the very least you have to go to your website because there's going to be so much inspiration there if you're someone who struggles with finding food that you want to eat or ideas or you're feeling a little bored. Like that is all there to be able to get some inspiration. So thank you so much for coming
Thank
on the
you.
show and sharing the flavor tips and the background.
Thank you so much. I loved chatting with you, and I hope that the listeners got a lot of value out of it.